In this lecture, we are going to explore a few things you need to be aware of if you decide to throw objects of your classes as exceptions. And here we're going to set up a simple class which is called something is wrong. We are going to have a simple member variable which is of std string type. We are going to set up a constructor which is going to forward whatever parameter we pass in here to our member variable. Nothing complicated here. We are going to set up a copy constructor because remember, the requirement for a type that you throw as an exception is for it to be copyable. So it needs to have a copy constructor which is living in the public scope of your class. We also have a simple destructor here which is going to be triggered whenever an object of our class here goes out of scope. And we have a simple function which is going to tell us what kind of problem we have if we throw this kind of exception here. So we can wrap our message in this function and return it whenever somebody needs to know what this exception is wrapping around. Now, with our class setup, we can do something like this. We can loop in the main function, for example, from 0 to 4. This is what we are going to do here. We're going to put in a try block, which is going to call our do something function. And this function is going to throw our type as an exception at index 2. This is what we want to try here. Now, I want you to see something that we probably didn't get a chance to explore in detail. When you throw an exception, C++ has a mechanism to take the exception object that you threw here and pass it to the point where it is going to be handled by the catch handler. And this is going to make a copy. For example, if we take this object and take it to the point where it is going to be used as a parameter to the catch block here, this is going to copy this object because the actual object we threw here is going to die the moment we exit the scope of this function here. This is the point of throwing exceptions. So we need to make a copy here because whatever it is we had in the scope of this function is going to die when we exit its scope. Now, what happens if this parameter here is passed by value? If we pass this by value, we will make another copy from this and have a copy we can use internally in our catch block here. And this is the reason we use a reference as a parameter here. This is going to avoid the second copy we would do if we pass this by value because we would be making an unnecessary copy. The copy we did at the first time here is necessary because what we had in our function here is going to die the moment code execution leaves this function, but we don't really need to copy this parameter here because it is already living somewhere in memory, so we can just use a reference and reference actual data that is living in this parameter here if we want to print the information from this object. This is something I want you to keep in mind. So if you throw an object of your own class needs to have a copy constructor that is living in the public scope of the class, but it is also advised to have a what function which is going to say what is wrong that caused us to throw this exception here. This is a convention we use in C++ programs out there. Now that you know this, we're going to head over to Visual Studio Code and play with this a little more. Here we are in our working folder. The current project is throwing class objects. We're going to grab our template files pretty quick and let's put them in place. We are going to open this in Visual Studio Code by dragging and dropping here. This is going to give us our main CPP file that we want to clean up. We are going to put in place our exception class. It is nothing really complicated. We just set up a class called something is wrong. It is going to have a member variable of type std string. And we are going to have a constructor which is going to forward the data that we pass in our parameter here to our member variable through our initializer list here. And we have a copy constructor which is living in the public section of our class. This is a very strong and important requirement for this class to work as an exception. And we are just going to copy from source and store our data in our mMessage member variable here. Nothing complicated. We also have a destructor which is going to be triggered whenever an object of this class dies. And we have a what function or member function which is going to return whatever is wrong that caused us to throw an object of this class as an exception. We can also set up a do something function, which is going to throw an object of our class if we hit index 2. So this is going to be what we do. But if we are not at index 2 here, we are going to say that we are doing something at this iteration here. We are going to hop over in the main function and set up a loop, which is going to loop from 0 to 4. And we are going to wrap the call to our function in a try block. This is going to cause for any exception that is thrown in our function here to be handled by this catch block. And we will be catching an object of our class by reference. Again, we use a reference here because we don't want to copy and have a copy in the body of the function here, because we have already copied an object that was thrown here and put a copy in our catch parameter here. So we don't want to copy this again because this is already living somewhere in the memory of our computer. We don't want to waste our resources. That's why we pass by reference here. Now that we have this, we can really try this out. This is going to loop from 0. So at index 0, this is not going to do anything special. It is going to say doing something at 0. At 1, we are going to run this. At 2, we are going to hit this statement here and we are going to throw our exception. The exception object, which is this guy here that we build on the fly, is going to be copied and passed as a parameter to the catch block. We are going to pass that by reference and use that in our handler here and say whatever was wrong. The loop is going to keep going, so it is going to execute 3 and 4, and it is going to print these messages here, and it is what we're going to see. Once we run this through our compiler, we are going to use GCC here. The build is going to be good. We can bring up a PowerShell window to try this out. So let's run Rooster. And at 0 and 1, we are not going to do anything special. We are just going to say that we are doing something at whatever iteration we are at. We are going to do the same at 3 and 4. But at 2, you see that we have thrown this exception and it was caught in our catch block that we have in the main function here. And we are going to say exception code, and we are going to say whatever was wrong that caused us to throw this exception here. And here we just put in I is 2 to mean that this was thrown at index 2 in our loop here. Hopefully this is super clear. Again, the message was that it is possible to throw objects of our class. One important thing to remember is to make sure you have a copy constructor living in the public scope of your class, and it is recommended to have a word function which is going to return whatever is wrong that caused you to throw an exception in the first place. And we can wrap this message by throwing our object as we did here, and this is going to be super cool. We are going to stop here in this lecture. In the next one, we're going to see that we can use class objects as exceptions and use objects that are part of an inheritance hierarchy. Go ahead and finish up here and meet me there.